So I will just say good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining today. We are going to be painting this um, watercolor night ocean scene. I called it night ocean. I didn't know what else to call it, but special request from Jen. So thank you, Jen.
Yay.
Thank you all for the suggestions you send. It's very helpful to know what you all want to paint, what you're interested in. So oh, yeah, I'm going to switch my camera so you can see my workspace. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. I'm just going to go over the supplies first. So I painted this on an 8x10 sheet of watercolor paper. This is 140-pound cold press. So, you can paint it on any size you like. That's what I am using. And many of you have heard me say this before, but this is a standard size piece of paper that will fit into a standard size mat. So this will fit perfectly into an 11x14 mat if you want to frame this after you're done. So,
Question.
yeah.
So I can't find 8x12. I find 9 by whatever, 9 by 14 or whatever, or 9 by. It's never
Yeah.
8 by 12.
The only 8x10 like
Or
pre-cut
8 by
watercolor,
10. Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
The only one I have found is the Strathmore pre-cut, which I use occasionally, but this is Arches, so I just cut this down. And if you
Oh,
have a bigger sheet, that's totally fine. The caveat to that is, especially for myself, if I don't have it cut to where I know it's going to fit in the mat, if I was to paint on like a 9x12 sheet, I would definitely go outside of the borders that I was supposed to go outside of. You know what I mean? If I have a bigger space, I cover the bigger space. So to limit myself so that I know that it will fit inside that mat, I cut it down. But
before you even start painting.
before I even start, now if you have a
Gotcha.
block, you could and shoot, I didn't bring my block with me to show you, but if you had a block, you could, either mark your margins
Yeah.
with pencil,
Right.
or I've seen like one of our artists in here, Lori, she paints on a block all the time and she uses her painter's tape and tapes outside the edges of her block
Yeah.
to make it, she like measures so she knows it's going to fit into
Which is
that
brilliant.
standard. I know, I've never seen anybody tape on a block, but that's what she does. And she usually paints her paintings to fit into an 11x14 mat, even though she has that bigger block. It's like, the 9x12 block or something. So that's just,
Right.
one way to do
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I
Yeah.
cannot find it at
Yeah.
all. And I don't know what you're talking about. You're
Well, and then,
crazy.
you can always get the bigger sheets of Arches paper and then just cut them down. So those come in 22x30 sheets if you buy them individually. And you can just cut them down, which is what I also do. So this one, this is out of a pad. Well, this is from a sheet, actually, a
Yeah.
larger sheet. This one, I have the pad of Arches paper, and it's in the other room where I'd grab it. But yeah, it's like the 10x14 size.
Okay.
So I just took a piece out and I have a paper cutter and I just cut to 8
Yeah,
inches. So I have an 8x10.
I've got a paper cutter. I realize the value of that.
Yeah.
But also, the other thing, just FYI, Michael's is having a stock up sale. So papers all buy one, get one, 50% off.
Wow. That's great.
Yep. So
That would be especially good for if anybody needs watercolor cards.
I didn't see any cards, but it's nice to have the different sizes available. You
Yeah.
know, you can just go grab a couple different sizes. And
Right.
like the one set is there's 20% extra sheets, so there's a little bit more.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Anywho.
Great. No, those are really good questions. I like to talk about supplies a little bit, especially questions anyone has. So brush, I'm using a number 6 brush. I have like a couple different ones here. This is my sort of go-to brush, the Simply Simmons brush. These are a synthetic brush, just really nice size, nice point, really affordable. So that's sort of my go-to. I also have this Princeton Lauren round number 6. I like this one a lot. I have this Winsor & Newton Cotman. These are all synthetic brushes. This one seems to be a little bit smaller. I'll hold it over the white so you can see that. This one I probably don't reach for as much. And I have been experimenting with these Princeton Velvet Touch. These are really nice, although they run a little bit small too. So this one's actually an 8. But it's actually a nice size and it comes to a really nice point if you're wondering about brushes. And you should always choose a watercolor brush that comes to a nice point. So I've got my watercolor set here. We're really going to only be using 3 colors. We're going to be using the ultramarine blue, Payne's gray. Does everyone have Payne's gray?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And we're going to be mixing in a little bit of your cool red. So whether that's your permanent carmine or alizarin crimson or the Van Gogh one is, can't remember right off the top of my head. It's also a cool red. It is the, Madder Lake. Any of those will work. So we're just going to be mixing in a little bit of the red to kind of get this purplish gray. It's not coming through on the video as well, the actual color, but got kind of a purplish gray sky going on. So really only 3 colors in this painting. So I've also got my paper towel underneath my palette. I've got my water container. So it's going to serve 2 purposes today. One, it's going to be a template for our circle, and it's also going to clean our brushes. Now, if you have a different shape of water container, that's fine. If you have something that's about this size, this is a lid.
I gotta go get one.
That's what we're going to use. If you have a drawing compass, you can also use that. So whatever you have around, that's, I don't know, this is about almost 4 inches. Now, the example that Jen sent is this one. The circle is just a little bit larger. So, whatever size circle you want to use for your painting, that's totally fine. I'm just giving you a guideline. So I used my water container for this one. So it's a little bit smaller than the example. And I'm going to talk about that example a little bit later, where it came from and how we use it. I've also got a kneaded eraser. We're just going to be doing very minimal drawing today, but I like to have my kneaded eraser for that and my number 2 pencil. So this is not a fancy pencil. It's just a writing pencil. You can use a drawing pencil if you like. And I've got my spray bottle. We're also going to be using this. Now, so that's another thing. You can either draw this moon freehand, which I did, or you can use some sort of template like a cap to something.
I'm at the top of my salt shaker.
There you go. Top of your salt shaker. That's perfect. So, or you can just, draw a circle freehand. So those are the 2 things we're going to be drawing, and then just the horizon line. If you're super picky about your lines being really, really straight, you might want a ruler. It's not required. I didn't use it. But if you want to make sure this line is perfectly straight, you could use a ruler there. And I think that's it. We're not going to be taping this down. Now my paper did buckle just a little bit, but I didn't tape it down because I wanted to move the paper around when I was painting on it. So, and so you can see it's just a little bit warped. Something you can do if you don't want to tape it down, or you're just painting on a small space like this, obviously we would want to tape down and stretch our paper if we were going to be covering the whole paper with paint and water. But in this case, it's sort of like the greeting cards suggestion I've given before. What you can do if you don't stretch your paper and you find it buckled just a little bit, you can just spray the back of your paper lightly with your spray bottle, and then put a sheet of wax paper on the back and a sheet of wax paper on the front, and then just put a heavy book on the top. After it's dried, of course, so that would be later today, and just leave it there for a day or so, and it'll flatten out, and then you can put it into a mat. Although this isn't really, I wouldn't call this a problem. I would probably just mat this one. So, and then I've got my water container. I think I already said that. Any questions about the supplies? Okay. Let's see here. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to take our watercolor paper and we're going to draw a circle. So like I said, you can just use your water container. Just make sure it's dry on the bottom. And trace around it with a pencil. Now, if you wanted your circle to be a little bigger, you could use the lid, or if you've grabbed something else, that's fine too. Or your drawing compass. I thought it would be fun to use our water containers because that's something that we have. Now, I know Jen probably uses it like a jelly jar or something like that, so that might be too small. I'm imagining she's using a jelly jar because of her delicious jams that she makes. See, I was right.
But look, also, I have this little water dropper.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And I have this tiny little jar that I use to like just drop a few drops of water instead of spraying everything.
Oh, wow, that's a great idea.
And then even then I can like take drops of water and put it on the painting if I want.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to have to steal that trick.
I love it.
Okay.
It's true. So I'm thinking a ribbon.
That would work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be too big.
Yeah. So can everyone see my circle?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm going to make sure the camera is focused here. Okay, so we've got our main circle, and then we're just going to erase a little bit out of the bottom, because on our example here, we have the ocean sort of going out of the boundary of the circle. So you can just erase just a little bit of that bottom, the circle. And then we're going to draw our horizon line in. Now, this one is just a little bit below where the halfway mark would be. So the halfway mark would be kind of right about here. And so I just went down a little bit further. It's really up to you where you want that to be. So like I said, you can either just kind of sketch that in, or you can take your ruler and draw it if you want a nice, or an edge of another piece of paper. If you have a piece of scrap paper, you can use that as a straight edge. If you want more sky, make your horizon line a little bit lower. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is draw our moon. I made mine just a little bit off to the right. It's not like right in the middle of the sky. So it's just sitting to the right a little bit. So it's kind of up to you where you want your moon to be. I'm going to put mine off to the right. Now, again, you can either just sketch a circle in. It's not really a super perfect circle in the example, or you can use the bottom of your spray bottle or a cap of some kind. This like chapstick cap is just about perfect for this. Okay, everybody got that? Okay. So we're going to start with our painting. So the techniques we're going to use today are, we're going to do some glazing. So we're just going to put a nice light wash over the sky. We're going to have like 3 different washes that we're going to glaze over the top. We're going to do the first one, just a regular wash. And again, this is sort of a purplish, bluish gray. We're going to paint around the moon here. And then we're going to let that, we're going to use the hairdryer to dry that because we're going to move into our ocean right after that. And I put 3 different sort of layers of brush strokes here. And you can see these are just brush strokes. So we're going to use a lot of the brush stroke technique when we do the ocean. We're going to leave some white space in here as a reflection. Then we're going to go back and we're going to add these additional washes. I've got a little bit of a backwash going on here in the sky. So that was what Jen was describing, where she drops water into the wash. It will push the pigment away from that area and give you that nice backwash effect. I think that works good for this sky. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mix this first wash. I'm going to clean up my mixing area here. So we're going to kind of keep about 3 puddles of paint going in our mixing area. So you're going to want 3 pretty good areas to mix. And if you have any scrap paper, it's good for testing the paint you've mixed. Doesn't have to be watercolor paper. It can be really anything. I've just got a piece of scrap watercolor paper here. So I'm going to spray my paints. I'm going to spray, I've got the Payne's gray, ultramarine blue, and then my cool red. And I'm going to bring some of this ultramarine blue out into my mixing area here. We're not going for a super dark wash. So I'm just bringing a little bit of this paint out and maybe a little bit of water. So I just put my brush in the water and bring that water into the mixing area. Then I'm going to wash my brush and I'm going to bring in just a little bit of my cool red. And we're going for kind of a more towards purple color here. And then I'm going to wash my brush and I'm going to bring in just a tiny bit of this Payne's gray. So Payne's gray is a pretty dark color. You're going to want to start with less rather than more. We just kind of want a nice bluish purplish gray. So thinking I'm pretty close here. Maybe just a little bit more of the red. So I'm pretty happy with that color. I'm going to just dip my brush in some water. Now I just painted directly onto the paper with this. So I'm just going to paint in the sky area. And I'm pointing my brush sort of towards my pencil line here. And I'm going to turn my paper a little bit. And just follow along that horizon line. Now, most of our pencil lines are going to be covered up with paint. So I'm not too worried about that. And I'm turning my paper and I'm just pointing my brush towards the edge just to give myself a little bit more control. I'm going to add a little bit more water here. So nothing fancy as far as a wash. We don't even really want it to be super smooth because we kind of want that sort of cloudy appearance in the sky. But I'm just overlapping the strokes that I did as I go. I'm turning my paper so that I have a little bit more control over where the paint is going. So you can see I do have some lines, but I'm not worried about that. I kind of like that because we kind of want that cloudy appearance. And we're going to add another 2 washes to get sort of those cloud formations after that dries. And you can get your wash in if you want to sort of get a little bit closer to the edges of the moon. Kind of clean up those edges. And my pencil lines are kind of messy, so I'm just going to erase them when I'm done. So again, if you want to be able to erase pencil lines, just don't paint over them. Once you've painted over them, they're kind of there for good. Now we're going to be doing a lot of layers here, so I think we're not going to have to worry about that. Everybody doing okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Barely done anything and I already love it.
Okay.
Done.
Great. Now, this is where the hairdryer comes in because we're going to go right to the ocean. So I think if we just hit it with the hairdryer for a few seconds, we just want to make sure, especially this horizon line, is dry before we move on down here. Now, I did this one again last night, and here I didn't dry it with the hairdryer, and I got a little bit of bleeding, which isn't even really a super bad thing in this painting because it's kind of cool. But if you don't want that bleeding right there, that's where we want to do the hairdryer. So I'll just ask everyone to mute yourself. And I would suggest turning your hairdryer on low and pointing it towards you so you don't blow everything off of your desk. So I'm just going to mute myself.
Mute.
I'm going to mute now, and we'll come back in 30 seconds.
Oh, there it is.
Or let's say a minute. That got rid of that, but not that.
Catherine, on that other one, that could be a ship on the horizon.
You're right. It could. Could actually have just like kind of embellished that a little bit and made it into a ship. That would be kind of cool, actually. Well, there you go. There's an option.
Whoa, I was still drawing. What option?
She was saying we could, this could have been made into a little ship on the horizon, that little part that bled into the sky.
Ooh, I like it.
Okay. So now we're going to get into our ocean. Now I did sort of 3 different layers of brush strokes here. I've got one with just ultramarine blue, and I did actually 2 of these. One I did more of a gray blue. This one has really 3 kind of distinct colors. So we're going to do this example. We're going to start with ultramarine blue. So we're just going to bring some of that into our mixing area, and we're going to just use brush strokes going left to right in from each side. And I'm going to put this example up here so you can all see it. And we're just going to use brush strokes to create our ocean. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to take some ultramarine blue. Now we don't want it to be super dark. I'm going to add a fair amount of water to this. I don't want it too light, but not too dark either. So I'm going to test this. That's about right. And then you can see in the example here, it stays inside the circle for a while, and then it kind of overlaps the boundaries as it goes down. So this isn't something where you have to worry about it being super precise because we don't want it to be. We kind of want to overlap the edges a little bit. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to kind of push down with the side of my brush. So I'm starting on the left, and I'm just going to drag my brush over to the right. Now, as we go down the painting, we're going to want to leave some of this nice white space for our reflection. So just remember that. But I'm going to start, and I'm going to go left to right, and then I'm going to go right to left. So that's about as far as I'm going to go over on that side. I'm going to just do the same thing over here. So kind of pushing down the side of my brush and just dragging my brush over. And you can see I'm not trying to make a perfect line there. I'm just trying to make brush strokes going in from each side. So I'm going to do that again over here. Just sort of dragging my brush over. I'm going to do the same thing from the right hand side. And I'm going to start to be aware of that white space there. So this is just our first layer. We're going to come back and we're going to do multiple layers here to really give that nice depth and sort of brush strokiness. So I'm still sort of staying inside the circle here. I'm going to add another brush stroke. So it's nothing fancy. I'm just starting from one side. I'm dragging my brush across. You can see the texture of the paper kind of coming through as I go. And that's really cool for like these ocean scenes to give the impression of sort of the waves coming up through the water. So now that I get down to the bottom of my circle where I don't have a line anymore, we can start kind of going outside the lines, still being aware of that where our light is reflecting from the moon. And I'm going to actually start kind of a little bit outside the circle on that one. And I'm kind of now using sort of the tip of my brush, but now it's just sort of you having fun with adding these lines. So it's just sort of kind of like scribbling with your paintbrush. And just sort of kind of going side to side here, adding some, and it's really sort of up to you how far down you go. Whoops, that was not the line that I wanted to make. So I'm just going to wash my brush. I'm going to paint a little bit of water over that line. And then use a paper towel to just blot that up. I might go down just a tiny bit farther. There we go. And again, this is just the first sort of layer. So this is going to be the lightest blue that we put in the ocean. And we'll come back with sort of a gray blue. And then the darkest areas here are the Payne's gray. While you're all doing that, is everybody doing okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Take that as a yes. Okay, so this example, I'm just going to talk about this example a little bit. So this came from Pinterest, I think. So this is someone's actual original artwork, probably. I don't know if this person, they signed it down here, if this is their original artwork or if they used another pin on Pinterest or image and made this artwork, but I'm going to assume this is their artwork. So in this case, we're copying their artwork. So the artist they retain the copyright to this artwork.
Mm-hmm.
So and I'm just saying this so that you know, and some of you are already aware of the rules around this, but because we're copying someone else's artwork, it would be, let's just say, not good to paint this and then sell it because you're sort of copying someone else's artwork and violating the copyright laws. And we're just using this as sort of practice for ourselves. But I wanted to point that out just in case, when we use like these images from Pinterest, it's really, really great to learn by copying another artist's work, but just don't sell it as your own work, if that makes sense. Give it away to your friends. put it up in your own house, but don't sell it. When I was in college, we did a lot of, studying other artists' work, drawing them, painting them. And it's a really, really great way to learn and get inspiration. But if you copy it exactly, then you really shouldn't sell it. Now, you could take it as inspiration and change it and make it your own, and that would be a different story. But we're pretty much, I would say, this is really pretty close to the original. I am making some changes to the ocean here, but I would say it's close enough to the original that we wouldn't want to all put this work up for sale in a gallery. So just my 2 cents on that. Okay, so we're going to move back up to our sky for a moment. So we're going to add another wash. We're going to start here and we're going to go all the way over to the right hand side. So I'm going to go back to my puddle that I created here. This is the one that's has the little bit of purple in it. And I still have some paint in here. I was hoping I was going to have enough for this wash, but I think I'm going to just mix a little bit more. So again, that was the ultramarine blue. And then we've got some of our cool red. We don't need to make this super dark. We're going to be doing what's called glazing. And you can use the same color and glaze it over itself. And those layers are going to be darker, even though it's the same color. And I'm going to add just a little bit of Payne's gray here. Oops, that might be too much. That is too much. You got to be careful with Payne's gray because even like a tiny drop and it's like everything's gray. I'm going to add a little bit more red to that. That's about right. I have to add quite a bit more water to make it light enough. I'm just going to test it on my test paper. That looks pretty good. So if this one, I'm going to start on the left-hand side of the moon, and I'm just going to push down with my brush. I'm just sort of starting over here by the moon, and I'm just sort of making some cloud shapes. It's really nothing fancy at all. And I'm kind of going diagonally up the circle. And then I'm going to dip my brush in some water and just sort of bring that color all the way over to the right-hand side. And going around the moon here. And before this dries, I'm going to dip my brush in the water and I'm just going to drop some water right in those clouds. Maybe like 3 drops. And it's going to give me that nice backwash effect, which can be a mistake if you don't want it, but we're using it on purpose here. Or if you have a handy dropper like Jen does, then you can just use that to drop water on your painting to get that effect.
You didn't paint the right side of the moon though.
I just sort of, I brought it all the way over, but it was kind of
Okay.
lighter by the time I got over there. I
Okay.
dipped my brush in a little bit of water just to carry that
To blend
wash
it
all the
in.
way over. Yeah. The main idea is to just sort of, soften that edge so you don't see another edge over here. So just carry the the edge all the way across.
Okay.
Hmm. All right, everybody doing okay with that?
Mhm.
Great. So we're gonna let that dry. And if your horizon line is not dry, you might want to touch it with the hair dryer a little bit. Mine's already dried. So I'll let you be the judge of that. I think you're going to be okay with this one. It was the first wash that I was mostly worried about. And we are going to mix some ultramarine blue now with a little bit of Payne's gray. So we're going to go for kind of a grayish blue now in our ocean. We don't want it to be too dark because this is like our second layer. Our third layer is going to be the darkest.
Okay.
So I've got kind of a nice bluish gray there.
But did you add Payne's gray to that or not?
I did.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah. So
I was drawing, so I didn't.
yeah, ultramarine blue and Payne's gray. Just going for a nice bluish gray. And then we're going to use the same technique now. With the second layer, I kind of used smaller brush strokes, but it's the same sort of idea. I'm starting from the left-hand side, and I'm going to go all the way across here for my first brush stroke. So I'm not pushing down with the side of my brush as much on this one, on that first line. And then I'm going to continue across. And so again, I'm just starting from one side and I'm pulling my brush across. And you might just sort of alternate with, you know, the brush strokes that we put down first, just to make it a little more interesting. Or you can just overlap the ones that are there too. And again, we're still trying to be aware of keeping this little area of white space. So I'm basically just making lines with my brush, going from one side to the other, pulling them into the center. And then again, as I get sort of down to the end of this circle, you can start going outside the lines here. And I'm holding my wrist still, and this is up to you. And I'm sort of moving my whole arm from side to side. It just helps me sort of keep my brush steady. And at this point, I'm holding my brush more up and down. So I'm using the point of my brush a little bit more.
No.
Now, you don't have to follow exactly where you put those first brush strokes. I'm sort of kind of overlapping and sort of not. Now, I think in this example from Pinterest, it looks to me like they actually used white paint here. I don't know that for sure, but it looks like it's sort of sitting on top of the ocean. So
Mm.
that's another thing you could do is paint in the ocean and use white. They've kind of dry brushed that on there. So that just means they're using a drier brush with less water and more paint and sort of using the texture of the paper to add that white. So that is something you can do. In my watercolor practice, I probably heard me say before, I don't use white. I like to use the white of the paper if possible for the white. That's sort of a traditional watercolor method, but lots of people use white. So that's just another thing you can do. Everybody doing okay with that? Great. Got a thumbs up from BJ. So we'll take a few more minutes to work on those brush strokes. Obviously, the bigger or smaller the brush you use, the bigger or smaller the brush strokes you can make. So if you wanted this to be a little bit more chunky, you could use a bigger brush. We're going to go back up into our sky here in a moment. Now, one way you could completely change this painting from the example would be to use completely different colors. You could do kind of like a sunset type color. Wouldn't be totally night anymore at that point, so it would be a little more like a sunset ocean scene. Speaking of paper sizes and mat sizes, something I've shared before, but since we have a few minutes here, I'll share it again. One way to get around, if you have paper that's not fitting into a standard size mat, you can get a slightly larger mat that it will fit into, but it's sort of laying inside the mat, and do what's called a float mount.
Mhm.
I'm getting a painting out of a bag right now. And put colored paper behind it. So here's an example of that. I've got this painting where I had paper that was smaller than the mat I had. And so, and I don't remember what size it was to begin with, but I put colored paper behind the mat, and then I used double stick tape to mount the watercolor paper to the colored paper. So then you have a nice little border of this color, whichever color you choose. Like this one, it could have been green. I chose blue. And this is a nice little small border, but if you had a smaller paper, you could have a bigger border of the colored paper behind it. One thing I would recommend is to get, make sure your colored paper is acid free. Like paper from the art supply store. They have big sheets at most art supply stores, like Strathmore, Canson colored papers. So that's sort of a nice way to deal with if you have paper that's not a standard size and you want to fit it into a standard size mat. Okay, so let's move back to our sky. Now, before we go on, I am actually going to clean up some of my pencil marks here. I'm going to clean up these pencil marks around the moon. I got real messy with my circle, and it's nice and dry now, so now's a good time to do that. I'm also going to clean up these pencil marks in the sky, in the big circle. I'm not going to go down into the ocean just yet because that's probably still wet. You want to make sure your paint is completely dry before you do this, or you will smear your paint. Okay, and we're going to do the same technique we did here, but we're just going to do another layer of clouds over here. So I still have paint mixed over here and enough to do this. If you don't, again, this was ultramarine blue and some of your cool red and a little tiny bit of Payne's gray. So I'm just going to take that. I added just a touch of water to it. And I'm going to use the same technique as I did before, sort of using the side of my brush. I'm just sort of pushing down and just kind of like squishing that paint around, sort of form some clouds there. And then I'm just going to bring that all the way down to the horizon line. Turn my paper to make it a little easier on myself and bring that all the way over to the edge of the circle. And I'm pointing my brush towards the edge so that I have more control over where that paint is going. And then I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to dip my brush in the water again. And I'm just going to drop some water into that cloud to get that nice backwash effect. And if you find you've got kind of a messy horizon line like I do, you can clean that up. Just bring a little bit of that paint down with the tip of your brush. And you know, you could make as many layers of clouds as you want, but this is kind of a small area, so I think 2 is sufficient. Another thing you could do with this painting, we stuck to 3 colors, but you could introduce a bit of yellow at the very end in the moon and the water reflection. If you wanted to change this painting a little bit, I think that would change the feel of it. It's kind of a cold, dark night feeling to me right now, and I think that would warm it up somewhat, but something to think about and experiment with. Now, I'm going to hit this with my hair dryer for just a few seconds because we are going to come back in and we're going to finish up our ocean, and we are going to get right up to that horizon line with the Payne's gray. So let's just take a few, half a minute, and just make sure that's completely dry before we move on. I'm just going to mute myself here. All right. Looks like Shannon's still drying. BJ is still drying. Wait a couple more, another minute. Now, if you were just at home doing this, you don't need to use the hair dryer. We're using it because we have a time restraint. So, you know, you can do these layers, get up, walk away, have a cup of coffee, work on a different painting, et cetera, and just let them dry naturally. This is just a little tip if you are crunched for time to dry your washes. I'm just going to check to see where everyone's at. Looks like Shannon's ready. BJ's ready. All right. I can only see like half of you at one time, and I have to switch and figured out how to see everyone at the same time yet. Okay, so we're going to add the final layer here. Now, every time I've done this painting twice already, and it turns out different every time, which is how my paintings usually are. This one I have kind of, it's a little bit lighter Payne's gray. This one's very dark, especially towards the horizon. I kind of like this one a little better. Now I'm looking at the video and they both look very similar on the video, but and then I left a little more white space over here than I did over here. So really everyone's going to turn out a little different, but right now we're going to go back and we are going to use the Payne's gray and add that final layer, which I think just, it gives it that depth that we're looking for. So I'm going to start with my horizon line. Now I like to pull the Payne's gray out into my mixing area so I know what I'm dealing with, because Payne's gray is very, very dark. And I am going to test it here. That looks good. I do want it dark, but you know, sometimes there's too dark. And I'm just going to start at the horizon line now. And I am using the tip of my brush here, I'm sort of moving my whole arm. I'm not flexing my wrist just so I can get a pretty even line. Doesn't always work. It might help a little bit if you turn your paper sideways, and you can sort of do this sideways, but with a little bit more accuracy. So I've got that nice line there right at the horizon, my starting point. And I'm going to use the same technique we used for all of the other layers. Here, I'm just adding more darkness and maybe smaller brush strokes and maybe a little fewer than the other layers. And I'm going in from the sides, just pulling the brush over the paper, and again, making sure that I stay aware of my reflection here in that white space. I kind of have a little bit more darkness right towards that horizon line than I did before. And then as I go down, making my brush strokes maybe a little bit thicker, pushing down on my brush just a little bit more. Now this one did a little bit better job of, I kind of got more of a like a zigzag pattern. So I might just try to alternate my brush strokes a little bit more here. Rather than making them perfectly even all the way across. I'm just adding a little bit more darkness. I want this to be just a little bit darker, so I just added a little bit darker paint on the sides here. And I'm just working my way down like we did before. And as I go down, I'm going to get a little bit lighter with my gray. So I want the darkest gray to be up here by the horizon line, which I might have to go back up and make that a little bit darker towards the end. But we're just using brush strokes to create this ocean. And I'm going to just get a little bit more less deliberate down here, a little bit more messy. So I'm really just kind of scribbling these lines as I get down towards the bottom. You could also change this up with using different shades of blue, maybe brighter blue or turquoise type colors. That would be cool. So I'm just going to come back up here and just darken this a little bit. And I think that's pretty much all I need to do on this painting. Now, if you want to make sure your horizon line is nice and straight, again, you can turn your paper to the side like this and sort of use the tip of your brush to touch up where it might not be. Now, I think since we have a bit of time left, we got done a little bit earlier. This one, what I am going to do, and you don't have to do this on yours, but I'm going to do it so that you can see it. I am going to go ahead and add a little bit of yellow.
Good.
So you can see what that might look like. So let me test this. Oh, that's going to be nice. Okay, so I've just got some cadmium yellow here. And I just have a tiny, tiny bit in my mixing area. I'm going to add a little bit more water. So I'm going to go ahead and paint my moon yellow.
Oh,
And now I'm going to go and I'm just going to go do some glazing right over the top of this white. So I'm just lightly using the tip of my brush and just carrying that down. So that's pretty cool. It's kind of a nice variation. So that did not take much at all. Just a tiny bit of yellow. Sometimes I'll do this with paintings if the painting looks kind of flat and it needs a little bit more life at the end. I'll just put yellow accents, add some yellow, light yellow washes. And sometimes that
I
will
like
warm it up enough.
out.
Say that again?
I like how that came out.
Yeah,
Looks good.
It's
pretty
a whole
cool, huh?
different feel for it.
Yeah, it is. We could do even, whoops, hit my camera there. Could do even a warmer yellow or orange. See how that turns out. Just mix some of this yellow, my red here. Carry that down into the water.
Mhm.
So super easy
Harvest moon.
variation on that theme. Yeah. How's everybody doing with that?
Pretty
Good,
good.
that's kind of
Good.
fun.
Good. What questions does anyone have?
So on the lower part, when you're down in the water, the problem I had was trying to keep the edge, that circle outline dark. I almost
Uh-huh.
had to go back and turn my paper to add another layer there, so it kept that shape.
Uh-huh.
So is that something that I just needed to do? I need to work more with my brush when I'm putting the initial strokes down?
To make them darker, or you're talking about like trying to make this like
Yeah.
a perfect edge here?
Yes, because I
Yeah.
found that when I put the lines in, that I lost that edge, which it kind of looked not so great. So then I went back and did another darker piece to it. So it wasn't the original lines I started with.
Yeah, I mean, even on mine, it is really kind of going over the edges here. I don't know if you can see that, but
Yeah, I
um,
can. Yeah.
yeah. So it's really not that perfect down here. And I would say, if you start with sort of, I'll get a little bit more paint on my brush here. Maybe start with the side of your brush, kind of like this,
Oh,
and
Oh,
pull
that's
out.
A little bit more.
Yeah.
Got
Rather than trying to do the tip of your brush, maybe start with the side of your brush like this from each
Yeah, I
side,
think
and
I'm
sort of
getting-
establish that edge maybe with the side of your brush.
Good idea.
nice
Yeah.
one. Good question. Thank you.
Yeah, and then you can always go back over it. Once you've established that edge, you can sort of add, a little bit more darkness with sort of the tip of your brush. But yeah, that's a really good question about establishing the edge. Yeah, try the side of your brush and just
Okay.
push down a little bit, and so you've kind of established the side and that edge with the side of your brush here, and then pull it along. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I noticed on mine is I didn't leave enough white, and on your two paintings, Catherine, your white is almost identical to each other, how it comes down the page, and I didn't leave enough. I don't have the pattern of the white coming down the page, so something I need to work on. I
Probably
have
just, yeah.
not the right way.
It's kind of like, yeah. And I had to remind myself too, like on this one, this is the first one I did. I had to remind myself because my first wash, I didn't leave any white space there.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of had to remind myself to be conscious of that. So this one has the least amount of white space.
Mhm.
But what I did was I sort of faked it when I did the second layers.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to be aware of it, and I only came in, like that far for the second layer. So this is actually, light blue back there, but it gives that illusion of light,
Right.
even though it's not completely white there. So yeah, I think it's just practice, like keeping your mind focused on, okay, yeah, I've got to leave that white space in there as I go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of great the way you did that anyway, because it gives it more depth in a way, and it seems to pull you back even further.
This one, yeah.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Good point, Sandy.
Yeah, that is true.
Oh boy, I'm looking forward to doing number 2, 3, and 4.
Me too.
Well, as you can see, that's what I've done here.
Yeah.
So I do one painting, like the initial painting, just to work out how I'm going to do it. And then the day before the class, I do another one to just refresh my own mind and go over my own follow my own instructions that I've created, And then of course I have the one that I do during the class. So, this is my third try on this. This isn't my first try. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
you.
Well, thank you.
It's really fun.
Have a nice
and
weekend,
thank you for
everyone.
being here, and I'll
you next
see you
week.
later.
We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.